Because you got something better for us than hot, fresh biscuits. Guys, as things come into our life, and they're going to come into our life, things we don't understand, things we don't like, things we don't appreciate. I was telling Lynn about a time in 2011. I was just talking on the phone and turning left into my driveway, and a no passing zone, and a woman tried to pass me as I turned and hit me in the driver's side door going about 60. And I didn't have a scratch on me. And my little $1,500 RAV4 turned into about a $6,000 upgrade from the insurance. I don't think the guy that wrote the policy on that. Sometimes we can't appreciate what's going on in our life. Today you may be dealing with a battle and you don't see the end. But I can tell you, God sees the end from the beginning. He calls those things which were not as though they were. He is the author and the finisher of our faith. So my message to you today, my pre-message to you today is hold on. You may not like the lard, you may not like the flour, you may not like the buttermilk, but I don't know about you, I sure like the biscuits. All right. So we're turning to Joshua chapter 2, and we're going to read the whole thing if you don't mind. So let's get started. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent the message to Rahab, bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan, and as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up to the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and when what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God of heaven above and all the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by my Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and my mother, my brothers and my sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives are your lives, our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she let them down by rope through the window, for the house she lived in was a part of the city wall. She said to them, go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. Now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord to the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head, and if a hand is even laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear. Agreed, she replied. Let it be as you say. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord to the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands, and all the people are melting in fear because of us. Bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father God, we come to you always. We approach your throne in the name of your Son, Jesus. Lord, I thank you for a message that I believe came from your throne room, God. I just pray that this be your word and not mine. So, God, as always, I ask, hide your servant. Lord, if there's anything that I prepared to say that need not be said, strike it from my mind. And God, as I prepare, I miss so many things, but you see everything. So Lord, I ask you if there's something that I've missed in my preparation, God, download it in real time. I am your servant and at your disposal today. God, make this a word for our time, for our people, and that this be a divine appointment so that hearts and lives be changed by the hearing of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. So, it goes like this. There was a man, and he sat on the New York City streets in dirty clothes. He was tattered, he hadn't showered in several days. And he sat there begging. He had a sign that said, "Hungry, need food." And he had positioned himself as close to Wall Street and the high rollers of the city near the UN building, where all of those people who have such a big heart and want the government to pay for all of these things to support people, that's where they all hobnob. It's right down these streets in Manhattan. And so he sat there. And he sat there in minutes, turned into an hour. And in an hour's time, sitting on the streets of New York among the wealthiest people in the world, he had one person that had even noticed that he was sitting there. A man walked by in a tailored suit and flipped one penny at him without even saying a word and just kept walking. And the man began to get disheartened. He thought, if I can't get food here, where can I possibly get food? These people have great abundance, and they don't even notice me sitting here. And so he kept sitting there, and eventually another man walked by, hurried with 2 bags of groceries, and he was walking fast, and he saw him out of the corner of his eye, and he stopped, and he set his bags down, and he pulled out his wallet. "I'm sorry, I don't have anything to give you." "One second." He reached in his bag, he said, "You're hungry, right?" He said, "I am." And he pulled out a loaf of bread, and he handed it to him, and he pulled out a couple of canned goods, and he said, "I'm so sorry. I know this isn't much, but it's really everything I can afford to spare." And the man said, "Before you go, can I ask you a question?" He said, "Yeah, sure." He goes, "Well, you seem like you're in a hurry. I don't want to slow you down. What was it that caused you to stop?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I've been here an hour. I've seen millionaires walking by, and not one of them have even acknowledged me other than to flick a penny in my direction haphazardly." And he said, "Well, I have to commute to work every day, and it's a 2-hour commute, and you said you were hungry." And he said, "Most of those days I have to do it on an empty stomach. I don't make that much money. I live 2 hours away, and so I'm usually going from train to train and walking home on an empty stomach, so I know exactly how it feels to be hungry. Most days I go without eating to make sure I have food to put on the table for my children. And I thought, I just can't stand to see anybody in the same shape that I've been in. And so I know it's not much, but I just wanted to give you everything I have, because at least you'll eat today and you won't feel that hungry feeling." And the man stood up with his tattered clothes on, and he kind of wiped his face and shook his hand, and he said, I want to give something back to you now." He said, "Oh no, I didn't do it for anything. I don't need anything. I just need to get home and get this food to my family." He said, "Just wait 1 second. I have something I'd like to be a blessing to you too." He reached in this dirty old jacket, and he pulled out a checkbook, and he dusted it off, and he wrote him a check for $2 million. And he said, "I'm the CEO of this building right here. I am worth $100 billion. And I thought this would be a good experiment to see how the people who work for me treat everyone else. They've been so fortunate and so blessed. I want to see how they use that blessing. And I can tell you, they don't use it very well. You I've never met. You didn't expect to get anything from me, and yet you saw me worthwhile, and you stopped remembering your own story, and you gave me something of value. And you didn't give it out of your abundance. I can tell you're a man of meager means. You gave it out of your lack." And the man said, I can't accept this. This would change my life. I didn't do it to receive this." And he said, "I know you didn't do it to receive this, but you gave me the greatest gift I could ever have. Today, my faith in humanity has been restored. Thank you. Thank you not for the bread and the canned good. Thank you for stopping and seeing me not as tattered clothes, not as a problem, not as a beggar. You saw me as a person. You saw yourself in me, and that changed everything. And so I hope this changes everything for you." Today I want to continue where we stopped last week. Our message last week was called Fresh Perspective. This is going to be called Fresh Perspective Part 2. Can we see the world through Jesus' eyes? oftentimes we want Jesus to see us through his eyes, but when we look out on dying, sighing, crying, broken humanity, we don't want to look at them the same way that we want God to look at us. We see the world defined by their sin. We see the world defined by their problem. We see them as a means to an end. And we never look at them and see the promises of God. I thought that story was fitting because that man didn't see any of those things. He just saw a person in need. Mother Teresa said, treat everyone you meet as though they are Jesus in disguise. And let me tell you, I think that would be the best way we could possibly live our life. Because too often, hey, and your pastor's guilty of this. Too often we do the thing that our kindergarten teacher begs us not to do. They say, don't judge a book by its cover. And yes, how many of us are guilty each and every day of looking at the cover of the book and thinking we know what the pages inside say? Had that man just looked at tattered clothes and thought, well, I don't really have anything to give, and kept walking as many do, he would have never gotten the reward for his good service. So, Brother Nathan, what in the world does that have to do with Rahab the spies? I bet you're probably wondering. Well, let's talk about something. Last week, we have to flash back 38 years from this day. We have to flash back to a day when Joshua and Caleb were desperately trying to convince the people living in the wilderness that this promised land was the land that God was giving them. But remember, they couldn't see the promise that day. All they could see was the problem in front of them. And they didn't see themselves in the right light. They saw themselves as grasshoppers. And so, most of those people perished in the way, and a new generation raised up. But Joshua, son of Nun, became the leader of a new generation. And 38 years had passed, and now it was time to go and take that promise we talked about last week. Sometimes there's something called hope deferred. We don't teach our kids in this generation what hope deferred is. They think they get it now. No matter what, if I work for it, I want my money now. Many companies have gone to a paying system where you get a card and you work your hours and you can go deposit that money from the bank. You no longer have to wait your week, your 2 weeks, or if you work for the school system a month, and hopefully you get it at the end of the month. You can get it now. But this was hope deferred, and Joshua had been hoping since he was a young man, and now he was an old man. And so God speaks to him and he says, send spies into the land. And I bet Joshua thought this, Lord, I remember the last time we sent spies into the land. I was one of them. We didn't come back with the land. So, where do these spies go? They go into the city wall of a place called Jericho, and they go straight to the king's house, right? Isn't that where most of us would go? We'd go find the wealthiest person on the block. We'd go find the person in the position of power. We would go find the person we think is most important. Do you have an ambassador, a mayor, a governor, someone who the world sees as having influence, right? That's where Joshua's spies went. Isn't that what you guys just read? Yeah. Where'd he go? They went to a prostitute's home, a lady of the night, a woman on the fringes of society, someone who no one thought was worth anything. They went to the beggar on the street corner. Why do you think they did that? What is the information and intel that they get from her that changed this entire operation? They didn't get anything from her. She doesn't know. She wasn't involved in military strategy. She wasn't the leader of the community. She was just a person among the people, a face in the crowd, someone who the people of Jericho didn't even value. Notice when they come to her, they don't offer her anything for her testimony. They don't promise to save her. They're not going to give her anything. She doesn't deserve anything. See, what they looked and saw was just a prostitute. When we leave these walls, how often do we look at people and we see these things? We see their sin. Now, don't lie. Come on, we're in the house of the church. Have any of us ever looked and thought, boy, but God can't save them. Look how awful they are. They have that old foul mouth, dirty clothes, wild hair. I can't believe they go out in public looking like that. Oh, I know what they do. No one's looking. We make judgments, don't we? So let me ask you this question. When the spies showed up at Rahab's home, what did they see? They were there on a God-divine appointment. what did they look and see? Did they see her as just a nothing, a nobody? Did they define her by her sin? You're just a prostitute. We don't need you. We need someone else. Is that what they saw? I don't think so. You don't have to turn there, but I want to talk about John chapter 8. If you have a Bible that comes from the Catholic Church or kind of from an old school mentality, John chapter 8 is not going to start this way. In fact, from John chapter 7 and verse 53 to John chapter 11, those verses are omitted from many scriptures. If you have an NIV, it's probably written in parentheses. But John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11, the Catholic Church had removed early on from the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament. Because this is one of the most famous stories. Stop me if you've heard it. So Jesus shows up and the Pharisees gather him and they've caught a woman in adultery. And they say, "Oh, Jesus, you're just the guy we were looking for. See, we found this woman doing wrong. She's caught in adultery. And by the letter of the law given to us by Moses, the penalty for such is that she should be stoned to death. So how would you rule on this case?" Right? Those all-important Pharisees in Judea and Israel, always holding and clinging to the letter of the law. They knew God better than Christ, right? What they found was a woman who they wanted to identify only as her sin, only as the circumstance they had found. Jesus does something unconventional. You know why I like Christ so much? Other than the fact that he died on a cross willingly for me. He said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." He rose again on the third day. He ascended to the Father on the 40th day. He's there preparing a mansion for me. He's sitting at the right hand of the Father, advocating for me every moment of his life. He's coming back to receive me one day. I like all those things. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for all of them. But I like so much how unconventional Christ is, right? Because anyone else, if they'd come at me like this, well, that's going to be a problem, because I don't really like you, and I don't trust you, and I know you're up to something. So you're picking a fight, you've got to fight. That's how I respond. Jesus doesn't respond that way. He stoops down low, ignoring them, and just starts drawing in the sand. Man, I wish I could be in a helicopter. How high can I be in a helicopter, John? Well, I want to see what he's writing in the sand, so we won't quite go 10,000 feet this week, right? Maybe we're 50 feet up in this helicopter. I would love to see what he wrote in the sand. And while he's writing, they're so impatient. They're like, "Okay, so what's the ruling?" You're all correct. The law does say we should stone this woman who we've caught in her sin, right? We should stone her to death. Now, let me ask you. Who here is without sin? Because you get to throw the first stone. That's how Jesus sees the situation. He's not looking at you or your neighbor or the person that you think is unworthy just by their sin or their circumstance. He's not waiting to find them in their sin and say, "Gotcha." He's not looking at Rahab here thinking she can never be anything but a prostitute, a harlot, a woman of the night, an outcast of society. He's not looking at a beggar in tattered clothes and thinking, "You're worthless, you're not even worth my time to stop." He looked at this woman and he saw something. It wasn't a prostitute. He says, "You without sin cast the first stone." The Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes and the scribes, and all the holy men, all the important people stopped and they dropped. Stones rolled, and one by one they left the scene. And then the woman looked because she knew who it was that was without sin. And he said, "Woman, where are your accusers?" And she said, "Only you remain, Lord." See, he was without sin. And he was fully within his rights to take stones and just start pelting her until she died. That was the letter of the law. But Jesus didn't define this woman by her circumstance. He saw something greater for her. And just like the promise he gave us last week, he had that promise in mind when he looked at her. And so he said, "Woman, neither do I condemn you. Leave here and sit down." I want to tell you, when the spies got to Rahab's house, they weren't looking and seeing a prostitute. So what were they looking and seeing? And how often do we look and see someone just based on their sin or their circumstance or their appearance or that moment in time when we make a judgment? And let me say this. If Jesus isn't looking and seeing a prostitute, then how dare we look through our eyes? It's time to start looking through his perspective and seeing the world just a little bit differently. So what did he see with the woman in John chapter 8? Let me say this. You know why the Catholic Church omitted that from the text of the Bible? They didn't want people believing that they could be saved if they had gone and done something as awful as prostitution. It's weird. They missed Joshua chapter 2 when they got there. They missed the entire book of Hosea. They essentially missed John chapter 4 because guess what? There is no unredeemable sin. When God shows up in your life, not only does he know the actions you've committed, he knows the deepest, darkest corners that nobody else sees, the things that you're hiding desperately, that you're ashamed of, and yet he looks and he sees, and guess what? He doesn't judge you based on that. He judges you based on this. Male and female, he created them in his own image. David, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. Jeremiah, I know the plans I have for you, plans to bless you and not to curse you, to give you a future and a hope. Before I formed you in your mother's womb, I ordained you and called you according to my purpose. He's not looking at you and defining you as the clothes you wear or your hairdo or the seat you sit in your church, by your job or by the thing you were caught doing today. He's not defining you by your lowest point, because if he was, then when he looked at that woman, he would have said, well, they're all gone. Now it's just me and you. And now you got to pay the piper. If he defined Rahab as a prostitute, she would not be a part of this story. Thank God when he looks at us, he doesn't just see a man of loose lips, a coward, someone who loses their temper at the smallest things, someone who can turn a mountain into a molehill at expert levels, right? Because if he looked at me, those are the things he would see. And I thank God he doesn't just look at Rahab and see a prostitute. So what does he look and see? What does he look and see? What should we be looking out and seeing when we see a person like Rahab? When he saw the woman in John chapter 8, what did he see? I bet you he saw pain. Have you ever looked at someone who doesn't talk the way you want, doesn't think the way you want, doesn't look the way you want, doesn't act the way you want them to act, and you think, oh my gosh, I just wish I could be as far away from them as possible. Don't lie. Is that how you see people? Just get them away from me. I don't care where they go. Just don't send them to 558 Albert Hook Drive, because I got nothing for them but an exit sign. Bar's closed. No, he looks and he sees pain. What leads us to our provocative behavior? What leads us to trying to stand out in a crowd? What leads us to our sin, our circumstance? What leads us to a street corner in tattered clothes, hungry and without a shower? What leads us to be a prostitute in the city of Jericho? Jesus looks and sees our pain. He sees the wounds. We sang songs about a man who went to a cross. And on that cross, he took railroad spikes into his hands and into his feet. He took 39 lashes with a cat of nine tails. He was at the point of death. His flesh was hanging from the bone. His muscle and his tissues had been ripped apart. He had a crown of thorns jammed into his skull. He was sweating blood. He was in absolute agony. You know why? Because he wanted to look at Rahab, just like he wants to look at you and me, and say, I feel your pain. If anybody feels your pain, I feel it. I carried it. I felt every stripe. I felt every lash. They mocked me and they ridiculed me and they called me things you couldn't even imagine. I know how you feel when the world hurts you. I know why you chose this life. But I look and see that pain, and guess what? I didn't take that from me. I was hanging there. I looked in your pain and your broken heart. And I saw you. I took that pain so you don't have to bear it forever. Give it to me. Give it to me. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't come off that cross and abandon you. No, Matthew 10 says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you, even to the end of the age. God sent those spies specifically to Rahab because she was a woman of great pain. How often do we look around and we only see circumstance and we miss the fact that there are broken boys and girls walking our streets every day. They have no idea where the next meal is coming from. They have no idea how to do this life. They're thinking, God, no one prepared me for this. God, I was just a child when someone came and wounded me, and I don't know how to act because of it. I feel like lashing out. I feel like screaming. I want to confront them, but they're not here. And I feel like the same little child that no one could hear. And now I have pain. And so, yeah, in my pain, sorry, I lash out sometimes, and I do things that they don't approve of, but they represent the ones who hurt me. When Jesus came to the woman in John chapter 8, was he there for the Pharisees? They were the important people, right? They were the ones condemning her. They were the ones who had hurt her. No, he wasn't there for them. None of them were saved that day. The only person he came for was that woman caught in her sin. He had all of Jericho he could have saved. And yet he sent the spies to a prostitute girl who benefited them nothing because she was brokenhearted and she had the pain of life and the wound of people mistreating her and using her and abusing her. Because he said, guess what, darling? You have no idea, but I came here just for you. And I can take that pain away if you let me. Just let me in for 1 minute. Let me find that corner of shame that you've never shared with anybody. And let me begin to heal it. So I ask today, do we need a fresh perspective? When we leave these walls, do we look at people and see their sin, or do we see their pain? I think that's a good question for us. I mentioned Hosea. So if you don't know the story of Hosea, it's an interesting one. Hosea marries a woman who had had a promiscuous past. God tells him to go marry this woman. And he marries her, and he loves her, and he has children with her. And then, like sheep, we all go astray. And then she leaves him. She goes back to the lifestyle of pain. She goes back and becomes a woman of the night, no different than Rahab. Mind you, God told Hosea to enter into a covenant with this woman. And so, in Hosea chapter 3, he says, Hosea, now's the time. Go and get your wife back. Get your life back on track. Continue to love her in spite of the places she's hurt you. Sounds a little bit like Jesus, doesn't it? And so Hosea goes, and not only does he have to get his wife back, he has to pay the price of a harlot to have his wife back in his home. I believe it's 15 shekels. Why? Because when people wound us, we never want to forget the wound that they caused. Lord, please take the wound that I caused them and bury it at the bottom of the ocean. But I'm never going to forget their pain. I'm never going to forget the wrong that I've felt. I'm never going to look at them and see anything other than their circumstance. And yet God said to Hosea, it's time to love. It's time to forgive. It's time to redeem. Your wife's a woman who's experienced great pain. I want you to see her pain. Because in that pain, you can find healing and forgiveness. We have to begin to look through Jesus' eyes and stop looking through our own. Number 3, when the spies got to Jericho, they saw a person. They didn't just see a means to an end. Yes, they were there, commissioned by Joshua, who was commissioned by the Lord, to go in and start getting intel about Jericho. And yet, they didn't go to the military leaders. They didn't try to make a deal. They didn't try to find Jericho's Benedict Arnold. They found an old prostitute girl, right? They never call her that. They never treat her disrespectfully. They never try to take advantage of her. Have you ever seen someone trying to witness out in public? And they just go from person to person and they do things like this. Hi, name's Nathan. Do you know Jesus Christ is your personal Savior? No? Okay, on to the next one. check the box. I did my part today, Lord. The Great Commission is being fulfilled. We condescend the world. You know what happens when we go knock on people's doors on a Saturday? I'm going to tell you what's going to happen if you knock on my door on a Saturday peddling that stuff. I'm going to say, thank you, no thank you. Get in your car and drive away. Right? This is my day with my children. I don't need you telling me my life's not where you think it ought to be. Obviously, I was too stupid to know that they sell Bibles and books a billion. I didn't know that there's 58 churches in Wickliffe. I couldn't find any of them with my GPS or my compass. Please come knock on my door again next Saturday and tell me how stupid and lost I am. Did you know that's how the world feels when we go into their territory and start telling them how wrong they are? You notice that's not how they approach Rahab. They didn't come in just checking the box off. Lord, you said it's my job to go and do the Great Commission. So here I have slapped the Bible down. I've read the 4 scriptures that I know. I don't know why they slammed the door in my face. What was their name? What are their interests? What are their hobbies? I have a lot of Joe Vanceisms, and here's probably my favorite. He says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. The day you win an argument with someone, the day you convince them that you're right is not the day they're going to come to Christ. You know why? Because you were a means to an end. The words that I so desperately long to hear when this life is over and I get to upgrade on to the next one are, well done, good and faithful servant. I really want to hear those words. But I don't want to hear them at someone else's expense. I don't want to treat the world like a prop in a play. I don't want them just to be the means to my end. Rahab wasn't just a means to them getting what they wanted. In fact, they got very little from her. The only information she was able to provide was this: we're terrified of you. We've been waiting for 38 years since the Red Sea dried up, and you all walked over and the Egyptians drowned. We've been thinking, oh no, when's the day they're coming to destroy us and take our land? 38 years they waited on the promise, not knowing that those people were way more afraid of them than they were of the people of Jericho. But they didn't see them as people. Remember when we looked last week, what did we see? We saw giants in the land. You know any of the giants? Shake hands with any of them? Get to see if maybe they already knew? What does Rahab say? We know that your God is the God of heaven and the Lord, and He's given you this land, and we've been waiting on you to take it from us. Oh, you mean you're a person who has thoughts and feelings? Too often we look at the world and we see a means to our end. I've heard people preach the sermon of the empty pew. Yeah, I want all these pews filled, and I want the pews turned into chairs, and we can get 25% more chairs than pews in here. That's 25% more people. And then I want to turn this into a bigger building where we can get more people. And you know what I want to do? My wife's rolling her eyes at me. She already knows what I want to do. I want to get to know every one of them personally. I want to talk to them after church. I want my kids to be pulling at my jacket saying, Dad, come on, we got to go. We got baseball practice. We've been here 4 hours talking to everybody. I want to know who's here. I want to know their story. I want to know why they stopped trusting the Lord and how do we get them to start trusting Him. But I don't just want them to be a means to an end. I don't want to condescend those people. I don't want to treat them like they're stupid cattle that just couldn't have figured this out without my help. I want to know what breaks their heart. I want to know what motivates them. I want to know why they became a St. Louis Cardinals fan. And if they're still going to be a Cardinals fan after this season. I want to know it. Because there's people coming. And people have a story. And their story is important to them. And you know who else their story is important to? Their story is important to Jesus. He talks and talks and talks about books. Your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Your story is being told. You're in this book and you're in that book. You know what books contain? They contain information. And in those, I believe He has all the information He needs about you and me. Because when He went to the cross, this was personal. And it wasn't just personal for me. I wasn't the only person that he said, Father, forgive Nathan. He doesn't know what he's doing right now. It was personal for people that I'll never meet. When I do meet him, I hope that I see them as a person. John chapter 4 tells an incredible story about a woman at a well. Ladies, I'm not picking today, I promise. I just want to make sure we know that these are people. One of the things I always say is the church has done such a magnificent job of treating this like a book of fairy tales. And these people didn't have real lives, and they didn't have real pain, and they didn't have real sorrow. We talked about Isaac standing on the promise at 60 years old with 2 sons and a dysfunctional family on Wednesday. And I hope I gave you guys some insight into me. I remember the day I pulled up to Murray, Kentucky, feeling like God had called me to Western Kentucky, thinking, Lord, I don't know a soul here. This isn't New York City, but it's big enough that I don't know how I'm going to make this place my home. I don't know how I'm going to make friends. This is a lot. I still think of the song Penny Lane. Murray, Kentucky is my Penny Lane, you know. Barbara has photographs of every head he had the pleasure to know. They're real people, and they can really relate with our story if we just treat it that way. This isn't a book of nursery rhymes. Mother Goose isn't tucking us in at night. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the God of 3 real men who were 3 real cowards, who had 3 real lives, who faced real world problems, and yet they were willing to stand on promises still being fulfilled 4,000 years later, because this is all real. So the woman shows up at the well, and this woman wasn't defined by the number of husbands she had had, or the man she was living with in sin, or the broken hearts and broken lives that she had left in a trail of tears throughout Samaria. She was a woman who Jesus walked out of his way for because he had divine appointment, because he wanted to save just her if she was the only sheep that had ever left the pasture. We talk about he's the one who leaves the 99 in search of the one. Well, guess what? Jews weren't even allowed in Samaria. They didn't communicate with Samaritans, and yet here he was chasing the one. Are we willing to go after one? Or are they too insignificant for our time? Do we have time to hear their story?